Alright fans, before we get into this video, I have a small favour to ask which will make a massive difference to my channel. Please can I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel and also give this video a thumbs up. It will be massively appreciated. Hey fight fans, we are just over 2 weeks away until UFC 330, which will take place from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the main event for the Welterweight Championship between champion Islam Makhachev and number 2 ranked Machado Garry is one of the most anticipated of the year. There's also the co-main event between Mackenzie Dern, who is defending the Strawweight Championship against Gillian Robertson, in what is another big title fight for the division, but perhaps not the most interesting to the fans. But the UFC are understandably promoting this card as being a 2 title fight card. You can see from the post on the right hand side that they're really trying to push this as being one of the few cards where we get 2 title fights. But the rest of the card has fallen into a lot of criticism. People are saying that this card is actually one of the weakest of the year, and in fact is probably weaker than a fight night in the Apex if you remove the main event. I've heard a bit about what's taking place on this card, but I haven't seen the final version of the card. So I'm going to take a look now and do a lifetime reaction to see if the criticism is deserved and if the rest of the card is really that bad. So let's take a scroll down to the fight card. Okay, obviously we've spoken about the main event and the co-main event. Right. Okay, I'm just processing this. Okay. I do see where the criticism is coming from. What I'll say about this card is there are some very notable names on the card. Jalen Turner, Neil Magny, Vicente Luque, Edson Barboza, Mansour Abdulmalik. These are guys who have fought in the UFC for a long time. They've had several fights in the UFC. They've always been around. But none of them are necessarily the most must-watch fighters. None of them are getting close to a title shot. None of them are in a title picture. I don't think any of the fighters on this card outside of the main event and co-main event are in the top 15 of their respective divisions. You could argue there's some very interesting potential developments from this card. So Neil Magny filing Ramiz Brahimaj. He's somebody whose name I've seen thrown around on a few random cards. This could potentially be a decent fight at welterweight, because obviously Neil Magny is the gatekeeper of the welterweight division. If Brahimaj is going to have any success in this division, then typically, he'll be assessed on what happens next if he beats Neil Magny. That gives him access to filing perhaps one of the top 15 ranked guys, or at least someone who's closing in on the top 15, but he has to pass a Neil Magny test. So when Neil Magny fights, there's always something on the line for the opponent more than Magny himself. Also in the welterweight division, I don't actually know who Jeremiah Wells is, but Urabai is a very up-and-coming prospect. I think he's one of the most promising names to come out of Central Asia. So he's somebody who I'll be keeping tabs on to see how he develops. Vicente Luque at middleweight, yes, I suppose I'm interested to see how he does going up a division. I think the middleweight does probably need a few new contenders, because interestingly, some of the previous contenders in that division have actually gone up a division themselves to light heavyweight. So the likes of Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa and Reina de Ridder are now very much trying to apply their trade in the light heavyweight division. So we actually need contenders in middleweight. So Vicente Luque going up a division probably is good, just in keeping some fresh names in that division. And Luque himself, he's been around for a long time, but he's still fairly young. I think he's 34 years old, so he very much could be entering the peak of his career. The thing with these fights are, none of them are actually that interesting to watch, if I'm being honest. I don't think any of these fights make me think I need to watch them. I want to maybe know the outcome, and maybe hear 1 or 2 opinions from people. But I wouldn't say I'm really desperate to watch any of these fights. Even the co-main event between Dern and Robertson, I think it's the right fight that needs to happen for the Women's Strawweight Championship. But I can't honestly say that I'm that bothered about the fight that I'm going to watch it. If this slogs out into 5 rounds and it's not the most entertaining fight, then I'm going to probably think to myself, I've just lost extra sleep. I want the division to do well, but I think it's probably one of the least interesting divisions for the UFC right now. If I'm being honest, on reflection at this current point, I'm only watching the main event. I'm only watching Makhachev versus Garry. I get why the rest of this card very much feels like an Apex fight night. It doesn't have, enough on this card to really entice me. I would like to have seen at least, you know, 2 fights which include 1 or ideally 2 ranked guys or girls competing against each other. But this card is very much underwhelming aside from the main event, and if you're being kind, the co-main event. So I'll probably just watch the main event. I think Makhachev will beat Garry. Garry is, in my opinion, the rightful challenger for that title. I do think he can be one of the trickiest opponents for Makhachev because of his range. And I did put in a recent video about welterweight title challenges that Garry probably is going to be one of the more challenging ones because of his range and because of his style, as well as being, you know, the rightful contender. But I still expect Makhachev to win this. I think he'll win by unanimous decision. I can see it being like a 48-47, maybe a 49-46 to Makhachev. And then he'll probably move on and face someone else. Maybe it's Prates or Morales. I think Morales is stepping in as backup for this fight. So if anything did happen, you know, he gets a title shot on short notice against Makhachev, or he faces Garry for an interim championship. Hopefully that doesn't happen, although it would have been nice to have seen Michael Morales fight on this card in a separate bout against another ranked welterweight. You know, that's the type of thing the UFC should have really done for this card if you're being a selfish fan who wants to see the best fights. But you know, this is a business for the fans, ideally. I mean, I know this is very much the fight game and money's always on the line, but you would like to think the fans have some say, so this does fall a bit flat as a card. But let me know your thoughts. What are your reactions to this card? How interested are you in the fights for this card? Who do you think is going to win the main event? Who's going to win the co-main event? I don't actually know too much about Dern and Robertson to make a prediction, but let me know if you have a strong opinion about that one. Thank you for watching. Until next time.